What's up, y'all? It's your boy Diddy with my newest edition of Cribs.
Today, we're diving into the chilling testimony of Ethan Cole, a professional painter with a story you won't believe. After Diddy's arrest, Ethan was hired by the LA police to restore the rapper's mansion before it went up for auction. His mission was simple: do the job and stay silent about anything he might find. But what Ethan saw inside that house was far beyond terrifying, and he couldn't keep it to himself. Today, for the first time, we'll reveal every horrifying detail of what he discovered. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. What do you think happened inside Diddy's mansion? Now let's hear Ethan's report. It begins like this. I still remember the day the phone call came. It was a Thursday early afternoon, and I was wrapping up a mural for a boutique in downtown LA. My phone buzzed on the scaffolding, and when I glanced at the screen, it read, "Unknown number." I almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and unnervingly professional. "Am I speaking with Mr. Ethan Cole?" "Yes, this is me," I replied, wiping paint from my hands onto my work apron. "This is Agent Lang with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a project that requires your discretion and expertise. Are you available to discuss it?" My chest tightened. FBI? What could they possibly need with me? My first thought was that I'd somehow gotten myself into trouble, maybe unpaid taxes or some unknowable screw-up. But as the agent continued, it became clear this wasn't about me. "We need a property prepared for auction. The owner is complicated. Your name came up as someone skilled and discreet." "Okay," I said cautiously, "but why me? This doesn't sound like my usual kind of work." The silence on the line was heavy, and when the agent finally spoke, his words felt carefully chosen. "We need someone who won't ask too many questions." That should have been the moment I declined, the moment I walked away. But then he laid out the terms: expenses covered, an eye-watering fee that dwarfed any job I'd ever taken, and of course complete confidentiality. "The property belongs to Sean Combs," the agent said, his voice dropping slightly as though the name itself carried weight. "Diddy!" I blurted out before I could stop myself. It was instinctive. Everyone knew who Diddy was: the parties, the wealth, the rumors. "Yes," the agent confirmed, "we're overseeing the sale of his Beverly Hills estate. Your job will be to restore any visible damage, repaint as needed, and prepare it for public viewing." It sounded straightforward enough, but there was something in the agent's tone, an underlying tension that made my skin crawl. "I'll need to see the property before I agree," I said. "You'll have full access," he replied, "but there are rules. No photos, no unnecessary exploration. Do your job and leave." "Why all the secrecy?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop myself. There was a pause. Then the agent's tone sharpened. "You don't need to know. You just need to do the job." His words hung heavy in the air. By the time I ended the call, my hands were trembling. Everything about this felt wrong. But the money was impossible to ignore. It was more than I'd make in 2 years, maybe 3. Enough to make me think that maybe I could look the other way. "It's just a house," I told myself later that night as I packed my gear. "A job like any other. Paint, patch, get out." But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something much bigger than me. Something I wasn't meant to see. The following Monday, just after sunrise, I arrived at the property. The instructions in the email were crystal clear. Come alone, park in the designated spot, and wait for further directions. As I drove up the long, winding driveway, the house came into view, and it was more extravagant than I had imagined. This wasn't just a mansion, it was a fortress of wealth, the kind of place that existed to flaunt power. Iron gates with intricate designs, perfectly manicured hedges, and a circular driveway that stretched like a runway. The house itself was a blend of sleek, modern design and old-world grandeur. Giant glass panels shimmered in the early morning light, reflecting the sprawling grounds back at me. But something about it felt off. It was too quiet, no landscapers, no maintenance crew. A house like this should have been alive with activity, gardeners trimming the hedges, cleaners prepping for a showing. Instead, the property felt abandoned, like a museum exhibit frozen in time. I stepped out of my van and leaned against it, waiting as instructed. That's when I first noticed it, the tension in the air. It wasn't something I could see or touch, but it was there. A faint, invisible hum that made my chest feel tight. 15 minutes later, a black SUV rolled up behind me. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements sharp and efficient. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't shake my hand, just nodded in acknowledgement. One of them handed me a plain keyring. "The house is empty," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You'll be working uninterrupted, but if you see anything unusual, you didn't. Understand?" I hesitated, my stomach knotting. "Yeah, got it." The men didn't linger. They got back into the SUV and drove away without another word, leaving me standing there alone, with the house towering above me. I walked up to the front door, a massive solid slab of wood with sleek brass handles, and unlocked it. The heavy door creaked as it swung open, and the smell hit me first. Not rot, not mildew. It was subtler, stale air like the kind you'd find in a space that hadn't been touched for months. The entryway was stunning, of course. Polished marble floors gleamed under the soft sunlight that poured through a crystal chandelier. The walls were adorned with oversized abstract paintings, each one looking like it cost more than my entire van. Everything screamed money. But as I stepped further inside, the atmosphere changed. There were no signs of life, no family photos on the walls, no forgotten shoes by the door, no mail scattered on a counter. Everything was pristine, curated, sterile. It felt less like a home and more like a stage. The deeper I explored, the more I noticed the details, the kind of things most people wouldn't bother to look for. A faint stain on the baseboard in the dining room, a jagged scratch on the hardwood floor that didn't match the placement of the furniture, tiny things that didn't add up. The air grew heavier with each room I entered. By the time I reached the kitchen, my chest felt tight, like the house was closing in around me. That's when I smelled it, metallic, sharp, faint at first, but it lingered in the back of my throat, clinging to the air like a memory. I followed it through the kitchen, my eyes scanning the countertops. Everything was spotless, untouched, except for a faint residue near the bar, a thin white powder clinging to the edge of the counter. My first thought was that it was cleaning product, but as I leaned closer, my gut told me otherwise. As I moved from room to room, the unease only grew. The house wasn't just empty, it felt watched. Every creak of the floorboards behind me made me pause. Every shadow cast by the morning sun seemed darker, more alive. Then I found the basement door. It was tucked away at the end of a hallway, almost hidden. The wood was darker than the rest of the house, rough and out of place, like it had been installed long after the rest of the mansion was built. The doorknob was cold under my hand. I twisted it, the latch clicking softly. The door swung open, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. A wave of cold air rushed up, carrying with it a smell I couldn't place, damp, metallic, and wrong. I hesitated, gripping the flashlight in my tool bag. My instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, to stay upstairs and finish my job. But curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, kept my feet rooted to the spot. With the flashlight in hand, I stepped onto the first stair. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I descended into the basement. The flashlight's beam flickered across the narrow stairwell, but the deeper I went, the more the darkness seemed to swallow the light. The walls were bare concrete, damp and streaked with grime. Scratches ran jagged along the surface, too deliberate to be accidental. Each step down felt heavier, like the air itself was pushing back against me. The smell intensified, a mix of mold and something metallic, sharp and vaguely organic. It clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe. When I reached the bottom, the flashlight's beam swept across the room, and I stopped cold. The basement was large, much bigger than I'd anticipated, but it wasn't what I expected. This wasn't a storage space or a forgotten wine cellar. It was something else entirely. The floor was rough concrete, stained with dark patches that radiated outward like something had been spilled, violently. Some of the stains looked old, faded into the surface, while others had a sticky sheen, fresh enough to catch the light. In the center of the room, there was a low platform, crudely built from wooden boards. Around it, a few folding chairs lay overturned, their metal frames bent and scratched. The platform itself was scarred, deep gouges in the wood, as though someone or something had struggled against it. My flashlight caught a mirror on the far wall, its surface cracked in a jagged spiderweb pattern. Beneath it, bottles were lined up along a long metal shelf. Some were tipped over, their contents spilled into sticky, dried puddles. The flashlight flickered. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. For a moment, I thought I heard something, a faint hum like distant machinery, or maybe breathing. Just a job, I whispered to myself, though the words felt hollow. My heart pounded as I stepped further into the room. In the far corner, the flashlight landed on something that made my stomach churn. A large, dark stain stretched across the floor, thicker than the others. It wasn't just a spill. It looked soaked into the concrete, almost alive in the way it gleamed under the light. Next to it was a small wooden cabinet, the kind you'd find in an old workshop. Its paint was peeling, and the door was slightly ajar. My hands trembled as I reached for it, pulling it open to reveal its contents. Chains. Thick, rusted chains coiled inside like a nest of snakes. Some had hooks on the ends, others were snapped clean, as if whatever they'd been holding had been strong enough to break free. The flashlight flickered again, and I heard a sound behind me, a faint scrape, like something dragging across the floor. I spun around, the beam shaking in my hand, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room and the heavy silence pressing down on me. My heart was racing now. The urge to leave was overwhelming, but something caught my eye near the corner of the room. A door. It was different from the basement's crude, unfinished look. This door was industrial, thick steel with a small, circular window near the top. The metal was dented, rusted, and streaked with something dark. The stains on the floor led straight to it. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, to go back up the stairs, pack my tools, and forget I'd ever seen any of this. But my hand was already on the cold steel handle. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, revealing a second room. The air inside was colder, the smell even worse. My flashlight swept across the space, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. In the center of the room was a large industrial freezer, its steel exterior scratched and dented. Surrounding it were metal shelves lined with vacuum-sealed bags, neatly labeled with names. Full names. I approached one of the shelves, my hand trembling as I picked up a bag. The plastic was cold and damp, condensation beading on its surface. Holding it up to the light, I squinted at the contents inside. It wasn't normal meat. The texture was wrong, dark red with grayish-yellow streaks and thick veins running through it. My stomach twisted as the realization hit me, and I dropped the bag, stepping back in horror. The room wasn't just cold. It felt alive, like it was watching me. My flashlight landed on a corkboard mounted on the wall behind the freezer. It was covered with photographs, dozens of them. Faces stared back at me. Politicians, celebrities, business moguls. I recognized some of them immediately, their frozen smiles looking out of place under the harsh beam of my flashlight. But their eyes were vacant, glassy, like they weren't real. Pinned beneath the photos was a single piece of yellowed paper. Scrawled across it in uneven, shaky handwriting were the words, "Invitation only." I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. A noise broke the silence, a faint, rhythmic tapping. I whipped around, the flashlight darting across the room. The sound was coming from the far corner, where a small metal cage sat. The bars were thick, the floor beneath it stained with streaks of dark red. The tapping grew louder. Then I saw it, a hand, pale, claw-like, gripping one of the bars from the inside. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned and bolted, my footsteps echoing as I sprinted back toward the staircase. The air seemed heavier now, pushing against me, slowing me down. When I reached the stairs, I took them two at a time, my breath ragged and uneven. I slammed the trapdoor shut behind me and stood there, gasping for air. The house was still silent, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I grabbed my tools, not bothering to pack them neatly, and rushed out the front door. As I stepped onto the driveway, the evening air hit me like a wave, but it didn't feel like freedom. 3 blue vans were parked near the house, their back doors open. Men in dark uniforms moved in and out, carrying stacks of boxes. None of them spoke. One of them looked at me, his face blank, his eyes cold. I didn't stick around to see what they were doing. I jumped into my van, started the engine, and tore out of the driveway, my tires screeching as I sped down the road. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the mansion was still there, glowing softly in the twilight. But now I knew what it was hiding. For days after I left the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something with me. Not physically, but in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the freezer, the photographs, the hand gripping the cage bars. The first few nights I barely slept. Any small noise, a car passing outside, the wind rattling the windows, made my heart race. By the third night, I started noticing the SUV. It was parked down the street, just far enough to seem inconspicuous, but it wasn't. It was the same black SUV I'd seen at the mansion. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but it was there again the next morning, and the night after that. By the end of the week, it wasn't just the SUV. It started with phone calls. My phone would buzz at random times, and when I picked up, there'd be nothing but static on the other end. Once, I heard faint breathing before the line disconnected. Then there were the strangers. At the grocery store, a man in a suit lingered near the produce aisle, pretending to inspect apples but glancing at me every few seconds. On another occasion, a woman sat outside my studio in a parked car, her sunglasses reflecting the bright afternoon sun, her face unreadable. The worst came late one night. I woke to the sound of humming, faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It wasn't coming from inside the house, it was outside, low and steady, like an engine idling. I peeked out the window. The black SUV was parked directly across the street this time, its headlights off, but I could feel its presence like a predator watching its prey. I pulled the curtains shut and sat on the edge of my bed, my chest tight with panic. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the walls into my bones. It stopped suddenly, leaving an oppressive silence in its place. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The air in my bedroom felt colder, heavier, like it had in the basement. I turned on the lamp, scanning the room, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing, but the feeling lingered, suffocating me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. Whatever I had stumbled into, it wasn't normal. It wasn't just about Diddy's mansion. This was bigger, something darker, something untouchable. But who could I tell? The police, the FBI, the same agency that had sent me there? My fingers hovered over my phone. I started to dial 911, then stopped. What would I say? That I found a creepy basement, a freezer full of whatever that was, a corkboard with faces of the powerful and famous? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd know I wasn't. Still, I had to do something. I pulled up the photos of the mansion that had been sent with my contract. No names, no identifying information, just the address and a timeline. I opened my laptop and searched the property. What I found didn't make me feel better. The house had a history, one that the agent hadn't mentioned. In the late 90s, a series of high-profile parties had taken place there, gatherings of the elite, music moguls, tech billionaires, politicians, all rubbing elbows. But those weren't the headlines that caught my attention. 3 women had gone missing after attending events there. The cases were unrelated, spread across years, but they shared one chilling detail. Each woman's last known location was the mansion. None of them were ever found. My stomach sank as I scrolled through the articles. There were whispers of something darker, a secret club, rituals, blood money, but nothing was ever proven. No charges were ever filed. Suddenly, my laptop screen went black. The power in my apartment cut out, plunging me into darkness. For a moment, I just sat there, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Then, outside, I heard the hum again. I crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The SUV was there, its engine running this time. The headlights flicked on, momentarily blinding me. Then they turned off, and the vehicle drove away, disappearing into the night. That was when I realized they weren't just watching me. They were letting me know they could reach me whenever they wanted. I tried to lay low after that. I didn't leave the apartment unless absolutely necessary, and I avoided using my phone or computer for anything other than basic tasks. But the sense of unease only grew. One morning, I woke to find an envelope slid under my door. No postage, no markings, just my name scrawled on the front in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. It was of me. Standing in the basement of the mansion, my flashlight aimed at the freezer. I dropped it, my hands trembling. Someone had been there, watching me, and now they were letting me know. Under the relentless pressure and growing paranoia, I decided I had no other choice. I had to run. Staying in one place was a death sentence. I packed what little I could carry, left my apartment behind, and hit the road without a destination. But no matter where I went, the shadow followed. Black SUVs would appear in random towns, idling on corners or parked outside motels where I stayed. The phone calls didn't stop either. Static, faint whispers, and sometimes nothing at all. Weeks turned into months, and I became a ghost. I didn't use my credit cards, didn't contact anyone I knew. I moved from city to city, staying under the radar. But the weight of what I'd seen, the freezer, the names, the photographs, stayed with me heavy as a noose around my neck. One night, deep in the backwoods of Oregon, I finally felt a glimmer of hope. I'd found a cabin, off-grid and isolated, where I thought I might finally be safe. For the first time in months, the night passed without strange calls or the hum of an engine outside. But the silence didn't mean safety. It happened just before dawn. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the cabin porch, slow, deliberate. I froze in bed, barely breathing as the creak of wood echoed through the thin walls. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They knew I was there. A faint knock came at the door, followed by the low hum I'd come to dread. I grabbed the knife I kept by my bed and crept toward the back door. My plan was simple: run into the woods, vanish into the trees. But as I reached for the doorknob, I stopped. There was a sound from inside the cabin. A faint, wet sound. I turned, the knife shaking in my hand, and my heart dropped. Standing in the middle of the room, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a figure. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could see its shape. tall, impossibly thin, its arms too long, its fingers curled like claws. The smell hit me then, metallic, thick and suffocating. The figure tilted its head as if studying me, and I felt the weight of its gaze, though I couldn't see its eyes. I stepped back, bumping into the door. The creature didn't move, but the air around it seemed to pulse, heavy and suffocating. "Stay away," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the pounding of my heart. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the cabin, through my chest, and then it took a step forward. I bolted out the back door, the knife clattering to the floor as I sprinted into the woods. Branches scratched at my face, the cold air burning my lungs, but I didn't stop. The hum followed me, growing louder and louder until it was all I could hear. I don't remember how long I ran. Minutes, hours. The world blurred into darkness and the sound swallowed me whole. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later, miles away from the cabin. A hiker had found me unconscious near a riverbank, my clothes torn and my body covered in scratches. When I asked how I'd gotten there, no one had an answer. My wallet and ID were missing, but someone had paid for my hospital stay in full. The nurse handed me an envelope before I was discharged. My name was written on the front in that same shaky handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. "You were warned." I left the hospital and disappeared again, but I know it's only a matter of time. They'll find me. They always do. If you're reading this, it means they haven't silenced me yet, but be careful. Some doors are meant to stay closed.